As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I realized with a growing sense of unease that I was alone in the house. Home, alone. My heart began to race, and the creaks and groans of the old building seemed amplified in the stillness of the evening. My parents had gone out for the night, leaving me to fend for myself. Little did I know that this night would become a haunting memory that would forever chill my soul. I decided to distract myself from my mounting anxiety by immersing myself in a book, hoping that the words on the pages would drown out the eerie silence that enveloped the house. I settled onto the couch, engrossed in the world of fiction, when I heard a faint sound that made my blood run cold. A whisper, soft and unintelligible, but unmistakably coming from the hallway just beyond my line of sight. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I strained my ears, trying to discern what had caused the sound. Maybe it was just the wind, I thought. But the night was calm, and there was no open window to let the breeze in. As I sat there, paralyzed with fear, the whisper came again. This time, it was closer, as though it had moved from the hallway into the living room. A shiver ran down my spine, and my grip on the book tightened. I tried to convince myself that it was my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. Summoning every ounce of courage, I slowly got up and approached the hallway. The whisper seemed to be emanating from behind a closed door that led to the basement, a door I had always been told to stay away from. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling with trepidation. With a deep breath, I swung the door open, and a gust of cold, stale air rushed out from the darkness below. I hesitated for a moment before descending the creaky wooden stairs. The only source of light was a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed an old mirror that hung on one of the basement walls. It was cracked and weathered, and as I looked at my reflection, something in the mirror caught my eye, a figure, barely visible, standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, and it was then that I realized they were not coming from the basement, but from a hidden passageway concealed behind a shelving unit. My curiosity got the better of me, and I cautiously moved the shelves aside, revealing a narrow, dark corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly into the abyss. With a trembling flashlight in hand, I ventured into the hidden passage, the whispers growing more distinct with each step. They were no longer whispers, but desperate cries for help, the voices of countless souls trapped in some unimaginable nightmare. I couldn't turn back now. I had to know the truth. The passage led me to a small chamber, and the sight that greeted me sent a chill down my spine. The walls were covered in eerie symbols and cryptic writing, and at the center of the room stood an old, ornate mirror. It was the source of the whispers, and it pulsed with an otherworldly energy. I approached the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, and as I peered into its depths, I saw faces, distorted, tortured faces of people who had long since vanished from this world. Their eyes pleaded for release, their mouths twisted in silent screams. I stumbled back, horrified by the horrifying vision before me. It was then that I felt a presence behind me, and when I turned, I came face to face with a ghastly apparition, a woman, her skin pallid and stretched taut over her skeletal frame, her eyes hollow and empty. She reached out a bony hand, her voice a raspy whisper. "Help us," she implored. "Break the curse." My fear gave way to sympathy, and I knew I couldn't ignore their pleas. I had to uncover the truth and put an end to the malevolent force that held them captive. The ghostly figures surrounded me, guiding me through a maze of secrets and hidden passages, revealing the dark history of the house. Long ago, it had been the residence of a wicked sorceress who had made a pact with malevolent forces to gain immortality. In return, she had to offer the souls of innocent victims, and the mirror had become a gateway to a nightmarish realm where those souls were imprisoned for eternity. With the guidance of the trapped souls, I found a way to break the curse. It required a perilous ritual, and as I performed the ancient incantations, I could feel the oppressive darkness receding. The mirror shattered into 1,000 pieces, releasing the tortured souls, including the sorceress herself, who was condemned to the same fate she had imposed on others. As the last shard of the mirror disintegrated, the basement was filled with blinding light, and the oppressive presence that had haunted the house for generations dissipated. The whispers ceased, and a profound silence settled over the once dreaded chamber. My parents returned home, oblivious to the horrors I had faced, and the house seemed like any other. But I knew the truth, the true, creepy, Home Alone horror story that had unfolded in the depths of that cursed basement. And though the nightmares still haunt my dreams, I can take solace in the fact that I had brought peace to the tormented souls and broken the shackles of a sinister legacy that had plagued my family for generations. It was an ordinary Friday evening when I found myself alone at home. My parents had left for a weekend getaway, and I was thrilled to have the house all to myself. I ordered some pizza, settled in front of the TV, and began to browse through my favorite horror movie collection. As the night grew darker, the wind outside picked up, creating eerie sounds that sent shivers down my spine. I dismissed it as my overactive imagination and continued watching the horror flick. That's when I heard the first whisper. It was faint, barely audible over the TV, but it sounded like someone was calling my name. I muted the television, and the whisper grew louder. "John! John!" It hissed, and I could feel a chill creeping up my spine. My heart raced, and I dismissed it as a figment of my imagination, perhaps a trick of the wind. With sweaty palms, I decided to explore the house, convinced that no one was home except me. I made my way to the basement, and as I descended the creaky stairs, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. It was as though a dozen voices were beckoning me, each one sending shivers down my spine. "John! Come down here, John!" I swallowed hard and reached the basement door. My hand trembled as I turned the doorknob, and when I opened it, the room was bathed in complete darkness. The whispers were so intense now that they felt like they were coming from all directions. "John! John! Join us!" I flicked on the basement light, and the sudden illumination revealed a sight that made my blood run cold. Shadows danced around the room, their movements unnatural and chaotic. I could hear faint giggles and whispers emanating from the darkest corners. Panic surged through me, and I slammed the door shut, bolting it for good measure. I ran back upstairs, my heart pounding in my chest, convinced that I had just witnessed something truly malevolent. I tried calling my parents, but there was no signal on my phone, and the landline was dead. I was trapped, alone, and the house seemed to have turned into a nightmare. Desperation set in as I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that echoed ominously. I peeked out of my room and saw a shadowy figure, its back to me, standing in the dimly lit corridor. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that it was facing the family portrait hanging on the wall. The whispers grew louder, and the figure began to mutter something incoherent. I summoned every ounce of courage and crept closer to get a better look. The figure was dressed in tattered clothes and seemed to be swaying as if in a trance. Its face was obscured, but I could see long, unkempt hair cascading down its back. My heart pounded louder, and I had to stifle a scream when I saw its hand slowly reach up and point at the portrait. The portrait was old, a faded image of my family, but there was something wrong with it. The faces in the picture were twisted in agony, their eyes empty and hollow. As I stared at it, I could feel a sinister presence emanating from the frame. The figure muttered louder now, its voice filled with anguish. "Join us, John! Join your family!" I stumbled back, my mind racing for an escape plan. I needed to get out of the house, away from the whispers and the nightmarish apparition in the corridor. But as I turned to leave, the front door slammed shut with a deafening crash. I was trapped, and terror consumed me. I rushed to the window, hoping to break it and make my escape, but the glass seemed impenetrable. Outside, the night had grown even darker, and the wind howled like a tortured soul. The figure in the corridor was getting closer, its footsteps growing louder, and its whispers more insistent. With no other choice, I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. I could hear the figure outside scratching at the wood, trying to get in. The whispers were now a cacophony, a chorus of voices urging me to join them. My sanity hung by a thread as I cowered in the corner of my room, praying for dawn to break and the nightmare to end. Hours passed, and just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the whispers ceased. The room grew quiet, and I cautiously peeked out of my window. The first light of dawn was breaking, and the figure was gone, leaving behind a sense of dread that clung to the air. Exhausted and traumatized, I ventured out of my room and unlocked the front door. The morning light poured in, dispelling the darkness that had held me captive. My parents returned later that day, finding me in a state of shock. I never shared the horrors I had experienced that night with them, fearing they would think me mad. But I could never forget the whispers, the shadows, and the twisted family portrait. The memory of that night still haunts me, a reminder that sometimes, when you're home alone, you're never truly alone. I've always been a fan of horror stories. The spine-tingling tales that made my skin crawl and my heart race were my guilty pleasure. Little did I know that I would soon find myself in a true creepy home alone horror story of my own. It all began on a chilly October evening. I was 17 at the time, home alone while my parents were away for a weekend getaway. They had left me with a list of chores to complete, but the allure of binge-watching horror movies was too strong to resist. As darkness enveloped our suburban neighborhood, I settled into the living room, a bowl of popcorn in my lap, and a sense of anticipation in the air. The wind outside howled like a ghostly choir, setting the perfect atmosphere for a night of terror. The first movie I chose was a classic, The Haunting of Hill House. The creaky old mansion and its sinister secrets kept me enthralled. Just as the tension reached its peak on the screen, I heard a creak from above, like footsteps on the second floor. My heart skipped a beat and I paused the movie. I listened intently, attributing the sound to my overactive imagination. But then it came again, a slow, deliberate footstep, followed by another. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was home alone. I called out, my voice trembling, "Mom? Dad? Is that you?" Silence greeted me in return. The footsteps continued, slow and methodical, as though someone was deliberately trying to make their presence known. My mind raced through all the horror movies I had watched, and I knew better than to investigate. But curiosity and fear got the better of me. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, the floorboards groaning beneath my feet. I wished I had watched fewer horror films, as my mind conjured images of dark figures lurking in the shadows. The steps grew louder, closer. Swallowing hard, I mustered the courage to ascend the staircase. The air grew colder with each step, and my breath formed a visible cloud. When I reached the top, I could see nothing unusual in the dimly lit hallway. The footsteps had ceased. I hesitated, torn between retreating to the safety of the living room or exploring further. A glimmer of bravery pushed me forward. The first door I tried was my parents' bedroom. It stood slightly ajar, and I pushed it open with trembling hands. Inside, their room was untouched, bathed in a pale moonlight. The bed was neatly made, and their luggage sat in the corner. There was no sign of anyone. A sigh of relief escaped my lips, but then I heard it. A faint whisper, like a distant echo. I strained my ears to listen, and the voice grew clearer. It was my mother's voice, murmuring something I couldn't quite make out. I rushed to the closet, thinking they might be hiding and trying to spook me. I flung the door open, but the closet was empty. The whispering continued, leading me to the window. I peered out into the darkness, and there, in the backyard, I saw them. My parents stood there, bathed in an eerie blue glow. Their faces were expressionless, their eyes vacant. They seemed to be beckoning me, their hands outstretched toward the window. Fear clawed at my chest as I realized that they were not alone. Figures, shadowy and indistinct, surrounded them in the yard. I couldn't make out their features, but their presence was suffocating. The whispering grew louder, a chorus of voices that chilled me to the bone. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. As I turned to flee the room, I heard a voice behind me, right beside my ear. It was a guttural, inhuman sound, whispering my name. I ran down the stairs, not daring to look back. The voices followed me, growing louder and more sinister. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. The police arrived quickly, but by the time they entered the house, the apparitions had vanished, and my parents were back in their bedroom, asleep. They found nothing unusual, no trace of the haunting figures I had seen. The officers assured me it was just a prank or a figment of my imagination, but I knew what I had witnessed was real, and it still haunts me to this day. My parents have no memory of that night, and I've never been able to forget the chilling voices that whispered my name. To this day, I avoid horror movies, and I never stay home alone after dark. The true horror of that night wasn't in the movies I watched, but in the inexplicable events that unfolded in my own home on that terrifying night at 13 Maple Street.